Tonight, when daylight disappears, you will probably reach for a switch without thinking. The room will brighten instantly and darkness will become optional. But for almost all of human history, people had no such choice. Once the sun went down, the world became genuinely dark. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors spent close to half of every day surrounded by darkness. Most of them had no candles, lamps, or artificial glow. There was only the night sky, the stars, and whatever fire they could keep burning. So what did people actually do during those long hours? To understand that, you have to begin with fire. Some of the earliest strong evidence of humans controlling fire comes from Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa, dating back roughly 1,000,000 years. Fire obviously provided warmth, but its real impact went much deeper. It changed the structure of the human day. Before controlled fire, nighttime was dangerous. Our ancestors did not have the eyes of nocturnal predators. Leopards, hyenas, wolves, and other animals could move through darkness far more easily than humans could. When night arrived, the safest strategy was usually to find shelter and stay there. A fire changed the rules. Its light created a protected space in the darkness, a small zone where predators were much less willing to approach. Suddenly, humans could remain awake after sunset without being completely exposed. And that gave our species something new: time. Before fire, useful activity largely ended with daylight. Depending on the season, that might mean only 8 to 12 productive hours. Fire extended the day by several more hours. A few extra hours may not sound revolutionary, but multiplied across thousands of generations, they became enormously important. Anthropologist Polly Weissner studied nighttime conversations among hunter-gatherers in the Kalahari and noticed something striking. During daylight, most conversation was practical. People discussed food, hunting, resources, plans, relationships, and the work needed to keep the group functioning. But after sunset, sitting around the fire, conversation changed. People told stories. They talked about distant places, strange events, ancestors, adventures, myths, and things that had happened long ago. They joked. They imagined. They entertained one another. The night gave humans space to think beyond immediate survival. Around the fire, people could talk about things that were not happening right now. They could preserve memories, teach lessons, explain the world, and imagine possibilities that did not yet exist. In that sense, the campfire may have been one of humanity's first classrooms, theaters, and gathering places. Those extra hours did more than extend the day. They may have helped create culture itself. But stories around the fire were only one part of the ancient night. There was another rhythm hidden in darkness, one modern humans almost completely forgot. And it involved sleep. The way you sleep today may not be the way humans naturally slept for most of history. Historian Roger Ekirch spent years examining old diaries, court records, medical documents, prayer books, letters, and literature. Across hundreds of sources, he kept finding the same strange phrases: first sleep and second sleep. Before modern lighting became common, many people apparently did not sleep in one uninterrupted 8-hour block. Instead, they often went to bed not long after darkness arrived. They slept for several hours, woke naturally during the middle of the night, remained awake for a while, and then returned to sleep until morning. That middle period was not necessarily considered insomnia. It was simply part of the night. People used those quiet hours in different ways. Some talked with family, some visited nearby neighbors, some prayed, some thought about dreams they had just experienced. Others wrote, reflected, or simply remained in bed while the entire world around them was silent. Historical medical advice even described this wakeful period as a useful time for contemplation. What is remarkable is that later historians sometimes overlooked these references because they assumed people in the past must have slept exactly as modern people do. Then, an experiment gave the historical evidence a biological explanation. Psychiatrist Thomas Vare placed volunteers in conditions with very long periods of darkness and removed normal artificial evening light. After several weeks, something interesting happened. Without being instructed to do so, participants naturally began dividing their sleep. They would sleep for roughly 4 hours, wake for a quiet period lasting 1 or more hours, then fall asleep again for another several hours. It looked remarkably similar to the pattern described in historical records. During that middle period, the participants also reported an unusual mental state. They often felt calm, thoughtful, peaceful, and almost meditative. Hormonal measurements suggested that this was not simply ordinary daytime wakefulness occurring at an inconvenient hour. The body seemed to be entering a distinct nighttime state. Imagine living with that every night. You sleep deeply, wake while the world is completely dark and silent, spend an hour thinking without screens, traffic, notifications, or artificial light, and then naturally return to sleep. For most modern people, that experience is almost impossible to imagine. So what happened to it? Why did a sleep rhythm that appears repeatedly in history disappear so completely that waking in the middle of the night now feels abnormal? The answer was not a sudden change in human biology. The answer was the environment. More specifically, it was light. Once people learned how to push darkness farther and farther away, the ancient structure of the night began to disappear with it. Beginning in the 17th century, European cities increasingly illuminated their streets. Paris introduced organized street lighting, London followed, and nighttime slowly became easier to navigate. Then, lighting became cheaper and more accessible. Candles improved. Gas lighting spread through the 19th century, and after electric lighting arrived, darkness could finally be defeated with the movement of a hand. Within a relatively short period, the night humans had lived with for hundreds of thousands of years was transformed. Even language carries traces of that older world. The word curfew comes from a term meaning to cover the fire. In medieval communities, nighttime bells could signal that fires should be covered or extinguished as people prepared for the dark hours ahead. Night was once treated as a separate world. Being outside after dark could be dangerous, suspicious, or even restricted. Darkness belonged to predators, criminals, imagined spirits, and whatever might be hiding beyond the small reach of a lantern or flame. Then humans illuminated it. And naturally, we called that progress. But changing the night also changed us. Modern people can remain exposed to artificial light for hours after sunset. Screens, lamps, televisions, streetlights, and overhead lighting continue telling the brain that the day is not finished. Light entering the eyes late at night can delay melatonin, one of the hormones involved in preparing the body for sleep. In effect, the environment keeps sending your nervous system a daytime signal long after the sun has disappeared. Studies of people temporarily living without normal artificial light have shown how quickly biological timing can shift back toward natural daylight. Remove the screens and lamps, spend evenings in real darkness, and the body begins adjusting surprisingly fast, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. Maybe modern life did not simply change what time we go to bed. Maybe it removed an entire part of the night. That quiet period between two stretches of sleep, the hours once used for reflection, conversation, dreams, prayer, intimacy, or simply lying awake in darkness, has largely vanished. Today, if someone wakes at 2 in the morning and cannot immediately return to sleep, they may assume something is wrong. They call it insomnia. But what if at least some nighttime waking is not the body failing? What if it is an older rhythm trying to surface beneath a world filled with artificial light? For most of human existence, nights were radically different from ours. People gathered around fires and told stories that passed knowledge from one generation to another. They slept in separate phases. They woke into hours of silence that encouraged reflection. And when they looked upward, the Milky Way was not a special sight reserved for remote places. It was simply the night sky. Our ancestors lived with darkness in a way we almost never do. Then we replaced it with electricity. We gained safety, productivity, convenience, and control. But we may also have lost a strange and deeply human part of consciousness without ever realizing it disappeared. This is Vesper, and tonight, when you reach for that light switch, remember that for almost your entire species' history, darkness was not an inconvenience people escaped from. It was half of life.